Is this microphone? Yes. Working. I asked to have an informal lecture instead of the usual standing behind the podium, because now I too can see the slides, which is always a good idea. Now, there's just one thing. I wonder where my glasses are. Wonderful.
I lose mine all the time, too.
An observant artist. And she is an artist. All right. Well, so if I can now see the slides, that'll be fun for all of us. And now if I can remember what they told me this does. Ah, yes. Here we go. How a retired professor turned to murder writing. And how did it work? Does it work? Aha. Oh, the technician is at fault this time. Oh, dear.
Turned on.
Thank you so much, Scott. Okay. All right, how did it happen? It was a fluke. I had never thought of doing such a thing. I'd never planned to do that. After I retired, I spent 8 years traveling to non-art history places just for fun, like Alaska 3 times because it's so wonderful there. And with Charlotte Whaley right here, we went to Antarctica, which was the best trip of both of our lives. Wouldn't you agree? So it didn't occur to me that I'd be writing again, having delivered myself of scholarly books. But 4 years ago on an American Airlines flight, this doesn't look like American Airlines, but it's the best I could find on the internet because I wanted it to go this way. A flight from Texas to New Mexico to the Santa Fe home outside the city in the high desert of Charlotte Whaley. We were on the plane, and I had just snatched up a very used-looking murder mystery paperback. I hadn't read murder mysteries since I was in my 20s, Agatha Christie, and then when Dan Brown came along, Da Vinci Code, so of course I read that, but I hadn't read anything else. So I picked up a murder mystery book and began reading it on the plane, and it had hedges and ponds and leaves and poppy seeds and hibiscus. It was full of flowers and meadows and parks, and the murders were few and far between. And finally I thought, why am I even reading this? So I put it down and said to Charlotte, you know, I'm just going to have to write my own murder mystery. And she said, do it. So when we got to her house, after a few days, I started doing it. And I haven't stopped. It's been so much fun. And I don't know what's going to happen next, but I'm right there at the computer writing it as a voice tells me what to do. I don't do any planning. I don't do a list of characters. I just follow what the voice says and type. It's the most exciting experience I've ever had in my life. And the books get better, too, by the way. I make some really stupid errors in the first book. For instance, one character who was drawn from life, named Jerry, I decided to name him Terry, and a few pages later, he's Jerry again. And I never caught that in all the proofreading that we did, so very embarrassing. But as I said, this is a new craft, and one works at it and learns more. So that's what started me. You might ask, who is Megan Crespi? Well, she has many hats. She is 80-ish. When I began the book, I was 78, and I decided that was too old for a heroine, so I made the heroine 77, which sounded really good. And then when I became 80, I made a slip in my book and had her be 80. So now that I'm 82, I don't say anymore how old she is because people aren't going to believe it, perhaps, that she gets around so easily. So she's now 80-ish. Do you think that sounds all right? 80-ish? All right. Yeah, yes, that too, if you can spell it. So Megan Crespi has the same credentials as her author. She is an Emerita professor, which means very old, right? Retired. And she also taught in the Department of Art History and in Dallas and at SMU. So there's some similarities between Megan Crespi and Alessandra Comini. Well, like Alessandra, Megan published a spate of scholarly books. And she began with Egon Schiele in prison. Hello, don't do that. Hold on, crisis, I'm going to master it. No. Supposed to go backwards. Oh, good, all right. So she began with, now let me do this correctly. Yes, Egon Schiele in prison, and several books on Schiele. And then she moved to Klimt, and then she moved to the general scene in Vienna, and then another little nude book on Klimt, and then Beethoven, out in several editions, all these books. In fact, this year and last year, suddenly a plethora of new editions of my old books came out, some with a 40-year gap. That's why I'm 80-ish. So Megan Crespi is very similar to Comini, and in Comini's scholarly books, and Megan Crespi's scholarly books, she has aimed to present the cultural content of artistic form. And some of you who have taken classes with me, I see you nodding, because that is what I really strove to do. The historical fact of the art object, of course. The biography of the artist, something that when I taught at Columbia University, they frowned on talking about. We were supposed to talk only about the art object. Whereas at Berkeley, when I taught there, the slide drawers began with pictures of the artist. Of course you want to know what the artist looked like. Not at Columbia, no. So I wanted to do the biography of the artist, give the cultural climate in which the artwork was developed, give a description of the art object, very difficult, and finally, interpretation. Was it Susan Sondheim who wrote Against Interpretation, I think? I never picked up on that, so I felt that interpretation was rather important. So, Schiele, Gustav Klimt, I tried the same thing in my classes, and they seemed to get the point because they usually got the pop test right. Now that I am out of teaching, let's see, retired in 2005, so it's 12 years, is it? I think so. I am now able, in these new editions of my books, to dedicate them to former students. And what fun that is. So Mark Craig is an Air Force man. Joanne Casulo, maybe some of you know her. Shelley Salem Stevens. So this is what I get to do now. Dedicate these new. One of them asked me to please show my teaching notes. So I don't know what this is in regard to really, but some of you who did study with me, now you know what I was looking at on the podium. Facts, dates. So this is what I have figured out, of course, that scholarly books are fact, and you don't want any fiction in there. It's versus fiction. But fiction can use fact. It doesn't have to be pure fiction. And the facts are what, at least in my case, inspire the fiction. So, off to a running start. Also the facts of my own life. I wrote a memoir at the behest of New York's legendary publisher, George Braziller, who is still alive at 100. And first I said no. He asked me in the year 2001. I said, no, why would I want to do that? Then I have to die right afterwards. But then 9/11 happened. And I thought about it again, and I thought, if we have anything to pass on, let's do it. So I did. I passed on my love and adventures. By the way, those of you who knew Eleanor Tufts, here she is, holding up a canvas painted by Rosa Bonheur, and you can see some of the cultural figures that I went in search of in this voyage of passionate pursuit. Eleonore Duse, D'Annunzio, Kollwitz, Bonheur, Napoleon, Beethoven, Goethe, Strindberg, Munch, Mahler, Schiele, and Nijinsky. So always my trips to Europe were in pursuit of several cultural figures at a time, as well as of artists. This also came out in a new edition, and this time they decided to show this death mask in one of my book rooms. So it's sort of a gloomy picture, but Whose death mask is that? Can any of you tell? Would it be Beethoven? I appreciate your reluctance because it is the death mask of Egon Schiele. Yeah, so that has always been an inspiration to me, if you can put it in that morbid way. First three books then were on the three artists I knew best, Klimt, Schiele, and Kokoschka. And where did the facts come from that I wrote about? Well, some of you might say, well, from the internet, right? Well, that's certainly true. Facts are findable on the internet. But as we all know, you have to be very careful, too, about facts on the internet. So I would say that in addition to the internet, which I use with tremendous frequency to check things out, education. Teresa, this is for you. Ursula. Where I was sent for disciplinary reasons. But anyway, this is the last time anyone ever saw me in a dress. Oh, okay, we'll go back. Okay. And then, of course, college. In my case, I went to the same college that my mother had gone to, Barnard College in New York. There, I fell madly in love with my professor of art history, Julius S. Held. I loved his accent. It was very pronounced. And I wanted to talk that way, too. He told me, after I graduated in 1956, go directly to the University of Vienna and continue studying art history. So good, I did. Excuse me. My parents were in agreement, and they sent me over to Vienna. The famous Ringstrasse here, containing the inner city with the Stephansdom. And just outside here, the Karlskirche, where I didn't know it at the time, Gustav and Alma Mahler were married. I lived in an apartment house that looked directly onto the Karlskirche. But as I said, in those days, I did not yet know these exciting things. And I walked along the Ringstrasse to the university, where Sigmund Freud had gone at the age of 17. Then he switched to the medical school. But I didn't know any of that then. And I wouldn't have cared, even if I knew it. Because what was fascinating for me was the fact that I was studying at a university where they spoke in German, and the professor who admitted me said, you will not have to speak in German until the second week of classes. And you mean asking questions? No, answering questions. Oh. I had studied German for one semester at Barnard, but that was all I had. So the first week went by too quickly. The second week began, but I was saved. In October of 1956, the Hungarian Revolution broke out, and hundreds of thousands of Hungarians fled their country as they tried to escape the communism of Mother Russia. They poured into the city of Vienna, and I knew I had a cause, as did so many of us university students. We left the university, and in my case, I was lucky enough to own an Opel station wagon, Opel Caravan station wagon. So I was able to make 5 and 6 trips to the border every day and bring back, I could get 5 people in that car if one person sat in the luggage area here. So back and forth, picking up the Hungarians. And it was so exciting because, of course, I couldn't speak in Hungarian to them, but we spoke in German usually, and if they did, they spoke with their heads down like this. If we spoke in French, they were more lively. If we spoke in Italian, they were really lively. So it was fascinating to see how the atmosphere changed according to which language you were speaking. Well, this changed my life. It made me very aware of nationalities, changing histories, sudden ripping away from your native locale. I wrote home about it a lot, and my mother collected my letters and sent them to the Christian Science Monitor, and by golly, this article came out. It reminds me that my mother herself, who wanted to be a writer, contributed an article to the Atlantic Monthly's 1936 edition, Spain, excuse me. in which, so you can see her name here, Megan Laird. We had to escape, well, I should say, my parents met and married on the island of Ibiza, and then after they had me, they rushed over to America to have me so I'd be an American citizen. Then we went back to Spain, and we lived in Barcelona. But then Franco came to power. There he is, the bad man. And we, well, escaped to Italy. But then 2 years later, in '36, who came to power? Mussolini. So we had to escape again. So the long and short of that is that we ended up in Texas. But now, having come back from Vienna and the excitement of the Hungarian Revolution, I wanted to get out of Texas. So where should I go? I've been to college in New York, grew up mostly in Texas. Where would you go? Go west, young lady. Yes, yes, you got it. Which city? San Francisco, yes. So I did not join the Haight-Ashbury group, but I was very close to it because I then picked up guitar. I became a secretary, but on all my off moments, I worked on guitar, discovered Pete Seeger and all the good singers of those days, and also played the flute and the piano. As some of you heard when you came in, I was trying not to be nervous, so I was playing the piano. Those were amazing days. Well, one day I saw in the newspaper an ad for wanted art history teacher at San Francisco State College, and I thought, oh, okay, I'll do that. I have a degree in art history from Barnard. So I trotted over, presented myself, and they said, are you? You don't have a master's degree. You don't have an advanced degree. Oh. So I decided to move Berkeley, across the bay from San Francisco. Actually, I still lived in San Francisco, but I directed my attention to Berkeley. And that was really exciting. I studied with two of the great medievalists, Jean Bonnet and Walter Horn. And I was all set to write my thesis on Christ, when he had a beard and when he did not have a beard. I just thought that was so fascinating when he didn't have a beard, as here in the apse mosaic at San Vitale in Ravenna, yes. Well, I was already writing this thesis when one day I was walking across campus and I noticed that my professor in modern art, I didn't think much of modern art at that time, but he was putting on a little exhibition that he called Viennese Expressionism. So I just dropped in to look at the exhibition. It was an epiphany. When I saw this self-portrait by Egon Schiele, my life literally changed. I dropped all interest in this topic, and I wanted to find out everything I could about this man who would show himself shrieking the way Edvard Munch showed himself shrieking. So I did find out about him. I found out that he died right at the end of World War I. He only lived 28 years. He constantly portrayed himself in agony, and even as Saint Sebastian, the girls. So this was what I wanted to do, study Egon Schiele, find out everything I could about him. His pornography got him in a lot of trouble. He was imprisoned for pornography for 24 days in 1912. Wrote a prison diary about the misery of being there. He constantly looked and studied himself in the mirror. This standing mirror, which you see, belonged to his mother, and she let him have it when he moved out of the house into his first studio, and he always had it with him in every studio. He took it with him. As he looked at himself, he recorded something no one had recorded. Compulsion to masturbate. A number of times he did this. A number of times he tried to stop himself from doing it. Here, for instance, he gives himself a doppelganger who commands him to do it, but he would rather amputate his hand than do it. This. You can imagine what Freud would have thought about that. And Freud had trouble talking to his own two sons about masturbation. It was thought at that time, you know what it was thought to do then. Yes, produce insanity. And the fascinating thing is that Sheila's father died of syphilitic insanity. So Sheila was practicing black magic, really, when he approached this forbidden topic. Well, when I went back to Vienna from Berkeley, I was going to write my master's thesis on the self-portraits of Sheila. I did no longer go to the university or to the Karlskirche. I went to the greatest collection of graphic works in the world, the Albertina Museum. There, in the museum, I did what I had heard Bernard Berenson had done and other great art historians, and that was when they went in front of a painting that they wanted to really know, they made a sketch of it. They sketched the painting. So I began doing that. I sketched every single Sheila in the collection. And I came across this, the fourth of 4 self-portraits that Sheila drew in prison for the first time without the benefit of his standing mirror. And he titled this, titled it at the top, Ich werde für die Kunst und meine Geliebte gerne ausharren. I will, for art and for my loved ones, gladly endure. So he shows himself clean-shaven, and he shows his hands for the first time. The other 3 self-portraits, he is growing a beard, he doesn't care, and his hands are hidden. Well, this riveted me. I wanted to find out more about this prison term, and I asked the director of the Albertina, where was Sheila imprisoned? Oh, some small village, Neulenkbach. And then I came across a letter in the Egon Schiele archives that asked, where was Sheila imprisoned? I would like to have photographs. Well, when I showed that to the director, he said, they're always writing about that. Well, it turned out that no Austrian had ever bothered to go to Neulenkbach. So what does an American do in that case? They rent a Volkswagen and they go, of course. That's simple. It was only 20 miles west of Vienna, so it was very easy to get to. The trick was to find out where in this small village Sheila could have been in a cellar, because his cell was one of 6 in a long cellar. Well, the only building that could possibly have had a long cellar was this one, the Bezirksgericht, the district courthouse. So I went up to the man who was sitting right inside the door there at a table, and I had a letter from the Albertina director saying, this young American student is interested in Egon. Please allow her entry. And the man looked at it and he saw the word Wien, Vienna, and Hauptstadt, and all these things, and he said, he was really irritated that I come from Vienna with a letter of recommendation. So he said, nicht, nein, das geht nicht, Sie können nicht herein. Aus Texas gekommen, aus Texas. Macht nichts. So I was not allowed to go in. So I reluctantly went away, a little bit away, and stood behind a tree. And at the stroke of a noon hour, about 13 or 14 people exited this building and went off to lunch somewhere. And as they exited, I did something that I'd learned in New York, where we used to walk in backwards to movie houses so we wouldn't have to pay. So I backed into and all of a sudden, I saw a stairway that led down. Well, I clattered down that stairway. Well, not clattered, quietly ran down the staircase. And I knew what it should look like from this portrait that Sheila had done of his prison corridor, with the buckets and the mop and the dismal gray. Sorry, I dashed ahead of myself. So what did I see when I got there? Well, I saw what you've just seen, the prison corridor, even the mop, even the bucket. And this, let's see if you notice it. The one thing that's changed from the drawing of 49 years earlier from when I got there in 1963. One thing has changed. Do you see it? What about this wooden support beam? Yes. This shows 49 years of weight. Oh, it was so exciting. And my heart was beating, and I focused my Rolleiflex 2.8, is that right, Adam? And took these shots, which you've just seen. And to hold it still was so difficult because I was trembling with excitement. but I got the shots, and then I wanted to find out which of these cells was Sheila's. So the next thing to do was to remember what I had drawn from what Sheila had drawn. He did a portrait of his bed in his cell. Things like the electric, which he found very ironic in his diary. He said, "How ironic. I have an electric bell to ring for someone." And here, in these bands across the cell door, I noticed that there were the initials that a previous prisoner had carved. I can show you a little closer. Can you read what those initials say? M.H. Well, I opened the first cell door, nothing. I opened the second cell door. There they were. Unbelievable. So trying to hold that Rolleiflex still again, I photographed that. That was recorded in my diary for that day as fantastic Sheila Day. And then Neulenkbach, on to Neulenkbach. And by the way, these diaries now, I've kept a diary since 1956. So that's 61 years worth of diaries, and they're going to Barnard College. They're very happy to have them. That resulted in my first book, Sheila in Prison. I translated his diary and used my photographs. And I was able to dedicate that first book to his two sisters who were still alive and very helpful to me, Melanie, or she called herself Melanie, and Gertrude. So that was my first book, 1973. And last year it was brought out again in a new edition, which I found very gratifying because so many young people want to know what went through Sheila's psyche when he was in prison like that. Well, I went from Berkeley with my master's on Sheila's self-portraits to Columbia, where I wanted to write a PhD on all of Sheila's portraits. I was asked to teach at Columbia the first year I was there, and so I taught classes while writing a thesis. And finally, in 1969, I did get the portraits study done and got the PhD, and this first edition was, as our introducer said, nominated for a National Book Award. It didn't get it, but it was nominated at least. And this too has been brought out recently. And the reason I'm showing you this particular picture with Sheila drawing Klimt, I mean, what more could you ask for? The reason I use it for this book cover is that it was a drawing given to me by one of the families whom I had interviewed so often in Austria. They gave it to me as a prize after having gotten the PhD. So I had it for many years, but then I decided I should share it. And guess where it is? It's in the Dallas Museum. And so for a number of years, I would send students down to the DMA. They had to draw it. The most important thing you can do is to draw. And speaking of giving gifts to the museum, I've been able to give small things, which is a pot inspired by Klimt, Bohemian wear, and large things. This is my sister and my brother. My sister's over there. When I had the statue at home still, some of the male students would do a trump. The reason I'm showing this several times is that it was done, this Lady Godiva, by a woman artist, Anne Whitney, one of the first of the Marmorian sheep who went over to Italy, to Rome, to study sculpture in the 1860s. So Anne Whitney, who lived till 1915, and there are statues by her in Boston, all over the place. She then was one of my first heroines. And I wanted to write a book about her, but instead I just kept on collecting women artists because nobody was collecting them in the 60s and 70s. I had this Rosa Bonheur, W-E-U, right? It's just so strange to say you, but all right, a portrait of a female baby sheep. How's that? That sounds difficult. That is going to the DMA. It's important for us to know about and spread the word about these earlier women artists. So that's why I finally, in the 5th book, thought, okay, now I can do it. I will write about the great Käthe Kollwitz, the German artist. But I'm jumping ahead of myself because we haven't even talked about my getting to SMU, where my mother founded the Italian department. It was as Anglo-Saxon as you can get. But she learned Italian to hook my Italian father, and that worked. And then she and I were both able to teach my baby sister. So what a nice move away from Columbia and the noise and the riots of New York. Loved moving here. My students were fabulous, many of them musicians. After final exams, I would have them over to my house and we would play music together. Wasn't always classical. I had a lot of noisemakers at my house, still do. And so we made quite a bit of noise. But even then, I was torn in my first studies with Sheila. Shall I stick with Sheila or shall I go back to music, my first love? But I decided, no, I'm not good enough. I'm just an amateur musician. Let me continue working with Sheila. And being able to be surrounded by original works by Sheila. Wherever I went in Austria, collectors opened up their houses to me, and also the friendship of Melanie, who read me all of Sheila's letters that she had, who gave me photographs from the Sheila archive. That was too much to turn down. So these were wonderful years, and she had Sheila's standing mirror. It was in her house. And there I got her to pose for me. You can see she was a very modest person, very unlike her sister, who was a flirt and a coquette. There's so many stories I could tell you, but I have to keep this to a good time sequence here. Melanie did allow me finally to photograph myself in mirror. The second time I had to try to hold that Rolleiflex still. And by having discovered that Sheila prison, well, in 2012, it was turned into a museum. And now it's the reason people go to this little village of Neulechbach to see the Sheila Museum. And this photo taken of me in 2012 when it opened shows me pointing to, guess what? M8, yes. You are the only people who know this. That's when I got the Grand Medal of Honor from Austria, and I wear it sometimes for formal lectures, but it punctures the throat. After that, the Neue Galerie in New York asked me to curate a show on Sheila's portraits, and it opened in 2014. We began working on it in 2011, and I learned what spreadsheets are. Ugh, very hard to work with. And for that opening, which had to be extended, by the way, it was so popular, people were literally lining around the block. I put together a catalog as well, and I had 3 male writers and 3 female writers in that catalog. So I thought that was an accomplishment. Don't you? Yeah, getting 3 women, all right. So, all right, talking about fact and fiction. As far as Sheila's concerned and that murder mystery about him, I had a diary. I had George Braziller published a book on Sheila for me, catalog from the Neue Galerie, and then my dissertation. So I was prepared with facts to write this fiction. Take a look, if you like, at this happy author in the home of the people who gave me the Sheila drawing, holding her original book and holding the portrait that they allowed me to reproduce there. Imagine, they let me take it off a wall, put it on the floor, and hug it, and be photographed with it. These apples here are to remind me to read, just a very short précis on the back cover of the book. So here we go. In this first in the Megan Crespi murder series, this first, I didn't know that there was going to be a series. How clever of my publisher. That inspired me. I just thought, I've written a mystery book. No, and then when I read that, wow. So in this first of the Megan Crespi mystery series, retired art history professor Megan Crespi, named for my mother, Megan, and Crespi just to sound Italian, and crisp somehow. An expert on the Viennese artist, wrong, Crespi. In this second of the Megan Crespi Crespi mystery novel series. The retired art history professor of Dallas returns to Vienna to help solve the brutal murder of a museum night watchman and a series of attacks on things relating to the expressionist artist Egon Schiele, ranging from black duck or spray paint censoring of his nude figures' private parts to desecration of his burial site. 3 sets of characters are involved with Schiele. Competitive billionaire, Russian gallery owners Alexandra Azarova and Boris Usachevsky. Actually, the composer Vladimir Usachevsky was one of my lovers while I was in college, but that's beside the point. Usachevsky, the scheming grand master of a secret sect dedicated to the obliteration of obscenity and his murderous underling, and the greedy, self-proclaimed nearest relative to Schiele, his great-grandnephew Adolf Peschke Schiele. Life in danger, the twisting Schiele trail leaves multiple corpses in its wake and leads Megan from conniving Vienna to remote Kaliningrad in Russia, to ancient Krubau in Bohemia and busy Milan in Italy, as she hunts for a possible hidden trove of major Schiele paintings undreamt of, and leaves the Schiele world stunned and covetous. So, now, the killing for Klimt. Died the same year Schiele did. Neither of them from injuries in the war. Schiele from a terrible influenza sweep across Europe and in America. Klimt died after a stroke. So both of them in 1980. My gallery asked me to partake in their Gustav Klimt show, and I suggested, let's have a CD of music. They'd never done that before, but they said, okay, if you'll do it. Well, sure, I'll do it. So I got to choose the tracks and write the liner notes for this CD. And one of the songs that I know, let's go back, was by a woman composer, Alma Mahler, Die Stille. Department has sung numerous times, as she also highlights women composers. Definitely on this. I've realized already that the cover to that Killing for Klimt is the right-hand side of the gold, the portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer in the Neue Galerie collection. $136 million. Far beyond that. So that is, well, sometimes you tend to over-identify with your work. Most people know Klimt from the Kiss. It's been on T-shirts, it's been on teacups. Everywhere you look, there is a reproduction. Allegories. This one, painted in 1902, really an accompaniment. Leipzig sculptor Max Klinger, who lived until all city celebration. Gustav Mahler conducted the last movement of the Ninth, reorchestrated for wind instruments only. So it was quite an event. And of course, reflecting his philosophy and what he thought Beethoven had been through, going through an army of evil vices and attain perfect love, set me off to next book, which had to be on Beethoven, the changing image of Beethoven, of course. And again, when you do these things, you go to the places, don't you? So I went to Bonn to see the statue of Beethoven there, which was unveiled, by the way, in front of Queen Victoria, but she had unfortunately been at building right behind. So she and Albert only saw the back of the Beethoven statue when it was unveiled. And of course, Leipzig, where Max Klinger, Kurt Masur was the man in Leipzig who held these biannual symposia in America and in Dallas. He heard me give a lecture on Brahms at Leipzig Gewandhaus. Leipzig Gewandhaus. So this that's the book that came out. I was really tickled in the pioneer application of. Well, I didn't know I was writing reception history. I was just writing about every single image of Beethoven when he was alive and then afterwards. I didn't realize I was doing, what's it called? Rezeptionsgeschichte. Apparently I did it before the musicologist did. Good thing. Back to the, based also on Schiller's. Realized and knew he had so much empathy for Mahler, all the troubles he had at the Vienna. Virulent anti-Semitism. This was Klimt's homage to Mahler and sort of. Well, the woman who told me about this immediate answer. Well, you're being very careful. Anybody else? I appreciate your caution. I thought everybody in the room would say, Klimt. It's Klimt, Klimt. Look at the way he positions her against that wild army of fighting warriors, Oriental warriors. And, she told me that she had her Wiener Werkstätte coat on. And Klimt said, turn it around. I want to see the beautiful Wiener Werkstätte. He said, so I took my fur coat off and I turned it around, and there in the portrait of. Well, all this action happens. Now Klimt spoke to her and she said, why do you want a portrait from me? You have been painted already by a very fine young artist. Now, wrong direction. Yes, Schiele. In 1914, Schiele had painted Belmonte, but look what he did to her. She was lying, she told me, on a mattress on the ground, and she had her arms around a pillow. He has turned her upright, has her plummeting through space, flailing fingers, head jerked back, and no environment. I have to do this as an artist. It's impossible to talk about these two pictures with the later in style one on the left and the earlier in style one on the right. So this is what we're going to do. This one was painted in 1960. Do you follow me? Okay, good. Because this is the difference that we're looking at between God, Art Nouveau, and the psyche, Impressionism. This is the difference between the environmental, and the exit. Impressionism was concerned with. So, facts, yes, and interpretation, yes, but fiction and fact in the actual book. Now, how about this? You know what I've learned from this? Pay attention to the font your publisher chooses and don't be afraid to protest. So I'm going to read this for us. And here we have, in this first in the Megan Crespi Mystery Series, retired art history professor Megan Crespi, an expert on the Viennese artist Gustav Klimt, becomes involved in a race to recover the secretum, a shameful secret panel stolen from the artist's studio the night after his death. in February of 1918. Her travels at the behest of New York's Moderne Gallery. Notice the slight change there. Owner of the famed 1907 golden Klimt portrait of Adele Bloch-Bauer. Her travels take her from the high desert of Santa Fe to Switzerland's Ascona, as well as to New York, Vienna, Helsinki, Paris, Montreal, and Girdwood, Alaska. Alaska? Megan is shadowed by two different assassins hired by the fanatical Gunther Winter, owner of Alaska's Alpenglow Hotel. He keeps his secret art collection in an annex basement. Several killings occur involving the interested criminal parties and naive owners of Klimt artworks. Finally setting up a trade of Inter Secretum for the golden Adele, Crespi and two colleagues fly to Alaska. They bring two crates, one purporting to contain the Adele portrait and a larger one to receive the. But their greed leads to unexpected and colossal consequences. Will Megan survive the final chilling? And in this book, my sister was with me under a pseudonymic name, and this woman, an artist sitting there, was also with me. Well, we're getting through this lecture. I hope if I could. See, I noticed without any prompting the apple. So. Now, the kokoschka capers. From now on, never say kakashka, all right, promise? It's kokoschka. He was Czech, so his name is pronounced the Czech way, kokoschka. Yeah. Just the way the Finnish, the first syllable is pronounced usually in Finnish, so it's Helsinki and not Helsinki. Learn these things as we travel, yeah. And it's fun to learn. Well, the kokoschka capers. He was a rival, really, of Egon Schiele. He was promoted by Klimt. Klimt promoted Schiele too. And he lived a long time, till 1980. Portrait in 1917 during the best of the Expressionist years. And you could call him the painterly version of Expressionism. If you think about Schiele's angular lines, this is the painterly version of Expressionism in Vienna. Well, if you think of kokoschka, and here he is, think immediately of the woman with whom he had an affair. Married to Gustav Mahler from 1902 till Mahler's death in 1911. After that, she had several flings. Before and after, really, because Gustav Klimt followed her and her family to Italy. He was so besotted with her. But then, consoling herself after Mahler's death, she had a very hot affair with kokoschka. And after that was over, she married the founder of the Bauhaus, Walter Gropius. And after that marriage, when 5 years was over, she settled in with Franz Werfel. Franz Werfel, the song of Bernadette. So, Alma Mahler and kokoschka, Oscar and Alma, they were a very happy couple, at least adoring him here, wonderful. Dance for her in which she stars, and he turns out to be. Adored her. Like this, though, when he painted his greatest work, and the one which is stolen immediately in the Tempest, he called it. So, why did he do that, showing me sleeping sleeping peacefully in his arms, while he, eyes wide open, surveys the universe and plans what is to come next. So she really hated this portrait. Well, when kokoschka went off to war, and he loved his uniform, he sold the painting in order to Mona Lisa did not wait for him. She was irritated that he had gone off to war. At the end of the war, kokoschka, who had several terrible injuries, especially to his ear, He went to Dresden. He did not return to Vienna. He was so mad that Alma had jilted him. He create a body and a letter to her with all the openings, please, all the orifices. Here is a reproduction of the doll, and he held forth in Vienna with the doll. He would dress her in different ways, but mostly he stripped her of clothing and pointed out the various orifices. And that letter to the seamstress still exists. Alma was furious. How dare he do this? So they really hated no love since medieval times. Her in Austria. She was also with him. All the Viennese artists. Apple. In this third book, in the Meg and Crespi Mysteries, major double portrait by the Viennese portrait, showing himself with his mother, stolen from the Basel Museum in Switzerland. I don't know how these ideas come from. Our professor of art history, Megan Crespi, called in to help with the investigation. There she meets by accident in this stunning anorexic. As Demona feels it is her role in life by Dr. Earl. Leo Lang and Bruno harbor fanatical interest in Popo, go to extreme measures to desecrate or to take her from Basel and Vienna to hurry, we only have two more. Okay. All know this icon. Never mind, never mind. I compensated. What do you think of that thing? Enemies, because look. Oh dear. Kingsbury. Oh, he left the R out. Composing her. Well, something terrible happens at this composing. This book was being and which is so animated, it goes, Paraguay, Scandinavia, till song. So I have this going all throughout the book. The buildings below. German roots. Last leg. Get to go to the wine and cheese. Oh, as far as jumping in. Yes, I did have facts to add. World War II and World because people say, well, look at her date. Here around the older women in the foreground, they're pulling up the bridge. Even this is still. In the book. Oh, excuse me. Tower to call this. He is two monumental granite statues by famed German from a World War I soldier. Crespi is asked to build the precious artworks. Murder mysteries. Amazon. Write reviews. I write more books. I dedicate books. The circle goes on and on. So what have I learned so far? Find out when did I don't get it right, get it written. Any of you who have papers Do you have any suggestions? Oh, I mean, other suggestions. It would get us to Switzerland. Oh, what's that? Yavlinsky. I'm sorry, my voice is gone. I've kept you too late. Let's go to the wine and cheese.